Hello everyone, this is Experienciainfinita. My name is Manuel, and in this episode, we're talking to Mary Helen Hensley about her amazing story that brings hope and sheds light on the inevitable event that we'll all face someday, our death. We talk about her near-death experience, about celestial beings, who hides behind the veil of reality, past lives, the life review, reincarnation, energy healing, a little bit about her new audiobook, Understanding is the New Healing, which I completely recommend. Subscribe to the podcast. Look for us in Facebook, YouTube, all the major podcast apps. Help us keep the lights on the studio on by donating to our Patreon account or buying some of the merch from the podcast. All the links, you can find them in the episode description. Enjoy our talk with Mary Helen Hensley. How you doing, Mary?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. All your life is like super interesting, even before you were born. Tell me how everything started.
Well, the best place to start is in the womb. And it is an unusual story, to say the least, because I came as a blessing surprise in my parents' 40s. And my parents got a call into the doctor's office, and the doctor sat them down and basically said, listen, folks, we've got bad news, and said to my mother that she had the German measles. And back then, this was kind of if it wasn't a death sentence for the baby, it meant that the baby was going to be handicapped in some way, physically challenged, missing a limb, blind, deaf. They gave them pretty much every worst case scenario, and sent my parents off to say, you know, you need to go get used to this idea, because this is in the late 60s, and there's nothing really they could do about it then. And so off my parents went, and my father was a minister. He was a Southern Baptist minister in America. And, you know, he had this unusual visit happen. And what was so interesting about this is that he called this visit, he saw two celestial beings, he called them. Now, what's so interesting for someone who is from the Christian church, you know, you would think he would say angels or the Holy Spirit or something. And he distinctly said they were two celestial beings, and they were very distinct in appearance. And they told him that not only would his daughter be okay, but that she was going to come in and have some unusual abilities. So remember, again, this is the late 1960s, and we didn't have ultrasound then. So sure enough, I'm born, I have no complications, and my parents are just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And so you can imagine they're always kind of hanging out looking, because these celestial beings said there were going to be unusual abilities. So it wasn't until I was about 4 that we had this great talk, and I always call it the kitchen table talk because I remember it so well. I was a very young child, called into the kitchen. Now, my best friend in the world at that time was my grandfather, Dr. Garland Clark, and he was a surgeon from Kentucky. He was so wonderful. We had such a great relationship, and I just adored this man. And he would read to me. He would educate me. He was always talking to me about how important it is to use our gifts in order to help other people. And so this was just quite normal for me.
How did it sit with your dad, the encounter with these beings? What was his reaction, since they didn't fit the description of angels?
These took on the appearance of, they were human, but they weren't, is what he said. And this was so interesting for him. So they took on an appearance that he could recognize as familiar, but he knew they weren't like him. And I always thought, how interesting. And they were very, it wasn't just like a thought he had in his head. They were physical in the appearance. And this is when my father began to be challenged with what was going to come from a lifetime of living around me. It was in his face. It did not fit in his box, yet he had to accept it because there it was in his face. And this was so interesting. And so, you know, that's why I always thought it was so interesting that he said celestial beings, because it's like he couldn't bring himself to say extraterrestrial or interdimensional, or maybe my guides or my guardians. He just simply couldn't even go there,
All right.
But he chose that term celestial being, which kind of I thought was his way of going, this is not any angel I've ever seen, or ever heard about. Yeah, so that's how he dealt with it. So they did a pretty good job, but they were always kind of hanging out, waiting for something. And so finally, I'm 4 years old, and I get called into the kitchen. And my father, he with his big booming Southern voice. He had this fabulous voice, and people loved to listen to him when he would preach, because he A, preached about sports, and B, he had this really fabulous Southern accent. And so he sits me down and he says, "Sugar, do you know the difference between alive and dead?" Now remember, I'm 4 years old. And I'm like, what? So my parents are cracking, because I'm talking about all of these conversations I'm having with my grandfather, my mother's father. And they finally have to break it to me at the age of 4 that my grandfather had been dead since I was 1. So now my parents are realizing, oh, this is what the celestial beings were talking about. So I'm talking to the dead grandfather all this time, and my parents were trying so hard. God love them. It was unnerving, because every time I'd say something, it's something there's no way I could have known unless he told me. I'm talking about a body or about an event or something that at 4 years old, there's no way I could have known. So this, again, is how my parents know this is happening. It does not fit into their box, yet they have to accept it as real.
Right, because there's confirmation about everything you're talking about.
Correct. Yeah, it was an unusual childhood. And it wasn't long after that actually just a year later, another major event happened. And we were at the beach in Virginia Beach. And this was an unusual time, because that coastline there had eroded terribly. And so there was a massive undertaking where they had brought these machines in, and they were blowing sand onto the beach and like rebuilding the beach. And so my father and mother had put us into the car. We lived 5 hours from there on the other side of the state. And we drove to the beach, and my father was terrible about not making reservations. We just go and we'll go up somewhere and we'll get what we can get. Well, there was no room in the inn anywhere. And so we were going from hotel to hotel and being told it's full, it's full. And so finally, after all night, we landed at this hotel. And my parents go in, they're able to get a room, and this hotel is on the beach. And so my parents say, "We're going to unload the car, stay right here, do not go anywhere." Well, of course, I'm 5 years old, and off I go. And so, oh, interesting, these massive machines are blowing sand everywhere. I want to see this. So I walk around towards the ocean, and I go and I'm watching the sand. Well, I kept walking, and so eventually I become lost. And so as I walk, these hippies, so imagine, it's in the very early 1970s, these hippies are sitting at a campfire on the beach, and they're smoking skinny little cigarettes that smelled funny. And so lovely. And I mean, just when you think now, a little child walking around, they were so lovely that they took me by the hand and they walked for hours with me to try and find the hotel, because I didn't know the name of the hotel where we were. And so in the meantime, my father is out looking for hours. And of course, there's no cell phones. There's no way to contact anybody. And finally, the hippies and I arrive at this hotel, and the woman had remembered telling a man where there was a hotel with vacancy. And that's how we found the hotel. And so I rock up hand in hand with my two hippies, and I'm having the time of my life. My mother is, and my father is gone crazy looking for me. And when he comes back, he starts as any parent would. He's so he feels so upset and out of control that he's angry at me. And I'm, I know he's relieved that I haven't drowned or anything, but He's angry. And as he's unloading on me, something unusual happens. And I have this flashback, and it was as clear as I'm looking at you right now. And all of a sudden, I was very aware of myself, and I was a woman just in my very early 30s. And I could see the gown that I was wearing, but through the sky were these flaming asteroids, like just pieces, chunks of flaming rock going through the sky. And I was up on a hill and looking down in a village that I knew that I lived in. But I was on this hill, and I was trying very hard before some awful event was taking place to safeguard these symbols. And you asked me earlier why I actually moved to Ireland. And this is important because those symbols, I've been chasing them my entire life. And so at the age of 5, my father he's not yelling at me, but he's giving me a lecture. And his voice just disappears, and I'm having this vision. And I'm seeing myself, and I'm this woman, and I'm trying to protect these symbols. And there is a cataclysmic wall of water coming. There is a massive wall of water. And I watch as my village is just engulfed in this water. My family is there. My children are there. And the water comes in and takes me. And I'm having a past life memory. And it's the first time in this lifetime that I'd ever experienced this. And so that's very important as we move forward as to why I got where I am today. But long story short, I had a very unusual childhood. You know, my parents, my father in particular, he was so protective, and he didn't want me to be made fun of. He didn't want me exploited. He had his own reasons. I don't know, I don't think he was ashamed in any way, because he always said it was a gift from God. That was the way he dealt with it. But I'm having dreams, and, you know, Mr. Jones is going to die on Tuesday, Dad, and Mr. Jones does die on Tuesday. And then that's my childhood. And so, again, my parents can't deny it. They can't explain it, but they can't deny it. And so my father said, we talk about this to nobody. You are always welcome to talk to me and to talk to your mother, but we talk about this to nobody. And so at a very early age, I began to learn not to acknowledge this part of myself. But it's it's like I was living 2 lives. I was living this very happy, bubbly life outside of here, and nobody out here even knows this other stuff is going on behind the scenes. And not even my brothers and sisters.
And how do you reconcile the fact that you were remembering past lives, and all the Abrahamic religions, they kind of deny reincarnation?
Well, at 5, I had no idea what it was I was seeing or what that was. All I knew was it was me. I wouldn't have had the language to accept or deny it. It was just an event that I was seeing, and it happened in that moment. And it was like it was imprinted on my soul. And that moment, because my father said something, and he said, do you realize you could have drowned out there? Because, you know, we're right by the beach. And it was when he said that something happened, and I go, no, that's not what it feels like to drown. That's not what it looks like to drown. And suddenly I remember what it felt like to drown at that time. That's how it triggered the whole thing. So, you know, I didn't even know at the time I was having a past life anything, you know. I just knew that I was this woman. I didn't know how to explain this, or, you know, how I was 5 years old then when I'm seeing it, but that was the very first time I ever had that kind of experience.
I see. And there's another interesting connection there in your life, because as far as I understand, your grandfather had some contact with Edgar Cayce, right? Who they call the sleeping prophet.
Very interesting. My grandfather, Judge, was from Kentucky, and so was Edgar Cayce. And so when my grandfather was about 15, he started noticing, he had been having it very similar to my own childhood. He had the dreams. He had heat in his hands, and he could touch things and know things. And so he heard tale of a man who they called the sleeping prophet, and he was visiting the town of Lexington, Kentucky. Edgar Cayce was from Hopkinsville, and my grandfather was from Winchester. And so he heard that there was a man who had these strange abilities. So at 15, my grandfather goes to Lexington to meet this man to ask him questions. And so he was asking him about his own abilities. Now, fast forward, my grandfather goes and becomes a doctor and then a surgeon. And so he ended up on numerous occasions in his career consulting with Cayce, because he had known Cayce since he was 15 years old. And so this is very interesting. And he used to often take trips to Virginia Beach. And yeah, it was because not only was he a medical doctor, but he was a medical doctor with an understanding of the paranormal, an understanding that life wasn't black and white, and an understanding that energy was at play. And so, yeah, boy, wouldn't I love to have been a fly on the wall in their conversations.
I know. Let's talk about a little bit about psychedelics. What do you think about them? Because some people are using it to connect, let's say, with other realms. I don't know what your take on it is.
Well, it's interesting because I would for a long time, admittedly, have been a snob when it came to hearing about drug usage. I think life is tough, and I understand that. And, my snobbery towards it is not because it fit in with my philosophy of life, because my philosophy is that we're all here to experience all things in whatever way, and it's nobody else's business what we do. Yet I always had this weird thing about drugs. And it's taken me a lifetime to kind of figure this out. And it was because I've always had the ability to access, and then of course after having been dead, the ability to access that state of mind, that place, those other dimensions. Like, who am I to stop somebody from trying to access that? However, on the positive, if we're looking at the light and the dark of a situation, there's always both. I know people who are working with plant medicine who have had tremendous success, extraordinary experiences when it's used in a situation where it's not recreational or abusive. I've seen people, gosh, what they've done with psilocybin. Oh my goodness. Other things, not so much. But then on the other side of that, in working in my capacity as a healer, I have also recently, this past 2 weeks, 4 cases where people have gone onto the psychedelics and then tripped themselves into a psychosis and are in bad shape, because so it's got its pluses and its minuses. And I think I think as we move further, we're going to again, rediscover how important plant medicine can be, but not in an abusive recreational sense where somebody is using it to escape their problems. If you're using it to escape problems, the outcome of what you're going to see is 9 times out of 10 probably not going to be happy. It's not going to be enlightening in any way. It's going to be terrifying, and terrifying to the point where I've seen people then go into psychosis that they can't get out of. And so on the flip side of that, I have seen people whose lives have changed forever because of an experience that they've had. So like anything, I guess, it's where you are in your own growth and development, what's on the journey, what your intention is. I don't have a judgment one way or the other, although I've watched people who utilize these things for reasons that maybe aren't full of integrity, or full of wonder or full of exploration in a positive light, but for escape. And whenever we try to escape anything, it's always going to come back and get us.
Yeah, I agree. When you're developing ESP abilities or you get into psychedelics, there's got to be a preparation, and then there's got to be an integration, right? Because whatever you're doing, if, like you said, if you don't have the right intention and if you're not focused, you can drive yourself crazy on these things. Can you tell me about the accident? Because that's super interesting to me. When you had your NDE, for what I understand, that's when everything exploded, right? Like your abilities just went crazy.
Sure. And the thing to remember about why the accident took place. So you imagine, I go through my teenage years. I've been told all my life, don't talk about this. I get to college and I let the secret out. I let the cat out of the bag with my friend, my one friend, my roommate in college, because we lived together in the same space and I was strange and things would happen at nighttime. And I wanted to tell her. I'd never lived in the same space with another human like that, except for my family. And so we thought it was very funny because we were both cheerleaders in college. And so I could see things before they would happen. And I'd see the score of a basketball game and I'd write it down and put it in the drawer, and we'd go and cheer and we'd come back and there was the basketball score. And it was hilarious, right? But this was the extent of my service to humanity. And so I had set up a safety net for myself that by the time I reached adulthood, the age of 21, if I was not utilizing these beautiful gifts and abilities in a way that I was in service to other people, then I had left myself a very painful reminder. And unfortunately, I made it to 21 and I was not using these abilities, but that's also free will. But I must have known this about myself because I set the accident up. I must not have had much faith in the fact that I would have found my way without a life-changing event, because I didn't. So I moved to South Carolina, which is where my boyfriend from college was from. And that was kind of what you did. If you were dating somebody, you went, graduate college and go to where they were coming from. And so I was working in a sign company, and it was time for our Christmas party. And so it was a very hot afternoon in December, and I had on shorts and a T-shirt and got into my car, and I'm driving, and I get to a stoplight at a major highway. And I had to wait at the red light. And I was going to be going across all the lanes of traffic and then turning towards town. And so when my light turned green, I made it all the way across these lanes until the last lane, and I looked, and I realized that the car that was coming towards me had no intention of stopping. And this was an elderly gentleman. He had almost killed a couple earlier in the year and still retained his driver's license. And I'm glad he did, because I wouldn't have had my experience without him. And all of a sudden I look, and it wasn't a question of if I die. In that moment, I knew I was getting ready to die. And what was so fascinating was I was completely aware that it was my choice how I wanted to experience it.
Now, I wanted to touch on that point. When you say that you had the choice, do you believe that that's what happens to all people when they're dying? They can either experience the pain and the suffering, or just remove yourself?
Yeah. Because at that time, at that point of pain and suffering as well, the body is already if it's going to result in a death, the vibration is already raising. The body is going through a transitory period, and what looks like suffering to us is a completely different experience to the soul that is transitioning. And this is what's really interesting. And it's very important. Anyone who's listening, who's ever lost someone to a tragedy, a murder or a horrible accident or a very painful death, remember this. The most important thing that happened in that, when I turned and I saw that car coming, was everything slowed down. It slowed to the point where time was almost standing still. And I had all the time in the world. It belonged to me. And I got to sit and go, oh, yeah. So imagine the preacher's kid here who's been told all their life that death works this way, and it's either, this is how this operates. All of a sudden I'm going, hang on a second. I seem to be the one in control here. Oh yeah, I remember how this works now. And I'm like, wow, I don't think I need to stay inside of my body to experience that impact. It's not going to serve me in any way. But for some souls who have come in to experience different things, being in the body and experiencing the pain temporarily before leaving serves them in some way. It's part of their learning and growing, and they choose to be in this. But remember, it's in an altered state. And when I say that, if someone can't get their head around that, imagine if you'd had a few drinks and you were happy, laughing, and having a great time, woo-hoo-hoo, and somebody tells you some bad news. And you're so altered in the moment that you receive the bad news that you're like, well, that's okay. I'm not going to worry about that right now. It's all right. In an altered state, the way that you integrate that information is completely different. So remember this, if you've lost somebody important to you in such a way that they are in a completely altered state, regardless of what it looks like to you. Oh, they suffered so much. Oh, it was torture. It just doesn't work like that. Do you know? And this was very refreshing and wonderful to remember in that moment. And so I'm like, you know what? That's actually going to hurt. I don't need to be in here. And so there was this beautiful sound, this drone, this vibration. And next thing, as that's happening, I'm realizing, oh, this is what's keeping me, who I really am, inside this body. And as I could hear it getting louder and louder, I could feel me, who I really am, leaving this body. I was still attached to the earth plane, though, and I'm looking down, and now the second I'm outside of myself and I'm looking at this, everything speeds back up again. And I watch my own death. So technically, my body's not even dead yet because I'm already up watching when everything speeds back up and smash. That car hits me and T-bones my car, folds it in half. My head goes through the window. My neck is broken. I'm spinning around the intersection, and I couldn't care less. I'm just watching. And this was so fascinating. And so this is very important to know when people are like, oh my gosh, weren't you trying to get back into your body? I'm too young to die. You know, it wasn't like that. It's like having on the grossest clothes that you can imagine because you've been outside and you're sweaty and sticky and hot. Or if you had on sweatpants, tracksuit bottoms, a hoodie, a parka, a coat with the hood on, and you jumped into a swimming pool. Imagine how heavy and awful that would feel. Coming out of the body is like leaving those clothes next to the washing machine and going and having the best shower of your life. The last thing you're thinking about is the clothes sitting next to the washing machine because you know that you aren't those clothes.
Right. And maybe at that time you didn't have like big attachments. So that was probably easy for you to just do the transition or, you know, get out of your body. But if that would happen to you right now, do you think that you would have your daughters in mind? Like, oh my God, I have to stay here. Like, that would make a difference?
You're thinking with a different mind when you are no longer in the confines of the body. And if you leave, and then if my daughters' lives were meant to progress without me present physically, I have no attachment to that whatsoever. And because now it's making so much sense that you've got this child who's speaking to the dead, basically, you know, it's like, Manuel, you and I are sitting here. I'm looking at you. You're on my computer screen. I don't know. I'm trusting that you're actually inside of a real body, but I don't know this for sure because I can't touch you physically. All I can see is that you and I are talking in real present time, and you're a little flat picture on my screen. I know when I'm looking that I'm inside my body. I'm in a flesh and blood, three-dimensional body. I can assume that you are, but I've seen beings in so many different states that I am not so stupid to presume that the body that I'm in right now is the only state of being. And so this idea is just instant. The second you come out of the body, you remember all of this. So it's not like you're going, oh no, I need to be physically present for my children, because you know that presence can never be broken. That in some way, shape, or form, I'm always part of that story. And so it's not a sense of loss or trying to, oh no, I shouldn't be dead. Oh, I was only 21. I had a whole life ahead of me. And this is the number one mistake that human beings do, and I think nowadays, is that we try to qualify our lives and their worthiness and their value based on the quantity of time we've been here. Because I always say, I know plenty of parents, mothers and fathers, who've lost a child in the womb, who were forever changed and never even physically met the child. I know people who've lost a child at age 3. I know people who have lost a grandparent at age 97. The age doesn't matter. It's all about the impact of the individual story in your own story.
When it comes to death in the West, we are more afraid of it. We don't even want to talk about it. And in the East, they're already spending a lot of time preparing for it, meditating for hours every day just to prepare for that moment, that transition. So do you think we're at different extremes of the same scale?
Those are 2 points on the same beam of light. And I don't want to live in either one of those points, to be honest, because I certainly don't want to live in fear of death. I can't. I couldn't if I tried. But I also don't want to spend the very short and precious time that I have here to live in a physical body in complete preparation for the inevitable. That makes no sense to me. To me, to somebody else, where they might feel that that's valuable and something that they can do to further grow and enhance their understanding as a soul, absolutely, rock on. That's not mine to judge. I'm saying for me, I don't want to be in the extreme of either, because to be over here means that I'm not present.
Right. If you're saying that once we're out of our body, that transition is natural, then it makes no sense. Like it matters, but it's not important.
Exactly. And no matter what your preparation, what you think you've done in your earthly life in order to prepare for death, we all get served up the same dish. So at the time of death, and this is huge, and I love to tell this story. I'll tell this to you now. When my father was dying and he had Alzheimer's, and he had spent his entire life as, not only a football coach and a football star, but he was a minister his entire life. And when he was going through his death process, he was terrified of death. Alzheimer's put him into a situation where he became terrified. He wouldn't even lie down in a bed flat because he was afraid he'd die if he did. Now, he could no longer speak at this stage. Months had gone since he could even put words together. And we were in the nursing home with him, my mother and I. And my father is shuffling around, and he's blah, 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 and he can't speak, and it's just awful. And he gets into the bed, and we're like, uh-oh. And he lays down in the bed, and my mom looked at me, and she's like, is he dying? And I went, there's no fireworks around him. And what I mean by this is that whenever a soul is transitioning out of the body, it's not like everything gets dimmer switch and the lights go down. It's the exact opposite. It's this beautiful transition process, fab. But my dad didn't have this happening, so I knew he was having an experience. And he's in that bed, and he's reaching up, and he goes, I can see it. Now, we're freaking out because he hasn't spoken in months. He couldn't. And I was like, hey, Dad, you can see what? And he goes, the land beyond the river, sugar. It's more beautiful than anything you ever wrote about. And we were laughing. And I'm looking at my mom. My mom is just, her mouth is hanging open. And he goes, oh, Mama's there, my grandmother. And he says, she looks so young. And he's just looking out, and he said, oh, wow, this is amazing. Next thing, he freezes, and he goes, oh, my gosh, Daddy's there. My father, being a very good Christian man, had a set of criteria that allows one to go to heaven and a set of criteria that means you don't go to heaven. And according to that Christian criteria that my father had created for himself and his standards, my grandfather did not get to go to heaven. And so this had made my father very upset all of his life. He was so sad and sorry for his own father. And this was a big deal for him. And it had haunted him all of his life because he had always tried to be this kind of man, and his father was not this kind of a man. And based on these criteria, you don't get to go. So he is sitting there, his mouth is open, his eyes are wide, and he turns to my mother and he says, Helen, I've had it wrong all along. You can't mess this thing up. Everybody's welcome here. And it was one of the most profound things I have ever witnessed in my life. A man whose entire life was dedicated to this separation, the idea of heaven and hell, and the sorrow that he felt for the fact that his own father didn't get to go. And here in his last moments in life, he gets to see and realize, oh, that was something that I made for myself to experience life while I was alive. That's not actually how it works. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. So when you say, does everybody get to experience it? Yeah, it doesn't matter what you practiced, what you believed, who you were, if you were a good guy or a bad guy, or you were a thief, or if you were a theologian, or if you helped people, or if you hurt people. At that end, once you finish playing that role, and this drives people crazy because we want justice. Our human minds want justice for those bad people. It doesn't work that way. We're all coming here playing roles to experience something.
Right. The way I understand heaven and hell is just maybe a limitation that we put ourselves so we can, live a straight life or rules, right?
Right. When I transitioned into that space where I could hear the noise, but I was still able to see what was happening below me, after that, the music changed and the vibrations got higher and more beautiful. And I ended up in another space. And this is where people are like, this is heaven. No, it's like Grand Central Station. It is a space between lives where things take place. And I was able to witness my own life, the last 21 years that I had just led. And I'm standing in an arena that looks like a 360-degree cinema. And I am now understanding, oh my gosh, that whole idea of time, we made that up. Because I'm watching my life as a 3-year-old, as a 17-year-old, as a 9-year-old, as a 20-year-old happening simultaneously. And I'm looking around, and watching this with me were 2 beings. And these beings had taken on human form. And these beings were my own guides. And I believed in that moment when I saw what they were, that this was what came to my own father, his own guides, his own guardians. And that he didn't have words. He didn't have a way to explain this because he was still in the body, being human when they came to him. I'm now out of the body in some other dimension in this amazing experience. And so they step forward and they are just pure love and joy, and they are with me. And as I look around and they have surrounded me with their love, I'm waiting. I'm going, wait a minute. This is the part where somebody's supposed to be judging me. Doesn't somebody decide now, do I go up or down here? And I'm looking and I'm like, there's no one watching and critiquing this performance except for me. And then you remember. And then you're like, oh my gosh, everything that happened in my life, I set up for myself to experience in human form. Oh, wow. And not only is your concept of the purpose of your life, but your perception of what time is and how we operate within the illusion of time, mind blown.
I wanted to go there too about time because we understand it as linear, right? Past, present, future. But I've heard and I've seen some other models that everything is happening at once. Is it time really working the way we see it? And it was very interesting to see or to hear you saying that, confirming that everything is happening at once. So that leaves the possibility open for us to interact with other times, like past, present, future.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It also means that we're always time traveling. And what's so fascinating with people who are stuck in grief and trauma and fear and angst, the only way they can go there, because the events that cause that aren't physically happening. You can time travel via neural pathways in the brain back to the cellular memory of an event, right? That's how we can still experience fear and trauma around something that's not still happening, because somewhere else it is. And it's happening on a cellular level, like a little tape recorder playing over and over. And the only way that in present time we can go there is to travel that little pathway and go back into that past. Or in anxiety of something that might come in the future, is to travel that little neural pathway. There's no way we could even elicit in the motion if this wasn't possible. We travel the neural pathway into the present or into the future where something is occurring, and we bring back that feeling with us. And if people realize we've been time traveling since the first day, and so how do we stop traveling to this event or to this event? Well, you don't go to therapy and fill in all the potholes and make peace with all the bad things. You go in with a big fat stick of dynamite and you blow that neural pathway up. And that's why I work with frequency, because in that space, when I realized, oh my gosh, everything is frequency. Oh, I understand how this is working now. The only way that I can be out of integrity, out of being perfectly centered, out of joy, out of creativity, out of productivity, and in these spaces of anxiety for the future or fear from the past, is if in my own mind, I create the avenues that are there. And what frequency can do is go in and it can alter the actual brainwave state and the neural pathways that allow us to chemically travel to an event that is taking place in a different type of reality. That's what a memory is. That's what a fear of the future actually is. And I find that fascinating, because it means that we are always in control.
Right, and now that you bring up light and frequency, I was reading about this Russian scientist, and they use light and frequency to turn some salamander into a different type of reptile. I mean, it's the same species, but it changed because all that goes straight into the DNA.
The DNA, exactly, which resonates in a human being at 528 hertz. And when you know the hertz frequency of DNA, you can change anything in the human body.
It's just a matter of training, because we could use, that's just an idea, we could use our mind, which is a tool, to alter all those things.
And it's so simple, really.
Uh-huh. Now, going back to where you were in the train station, one of the things that it's really hard to understand is that this is probably an infinite game, an endless going back and forth, right?
In this realm, remember, when you're thinking about it with a human mind and five senses, and you're trying to apply logic and reason to something, if you could picture the earth realm, the earth plane inside of like a bubble, a glass bubble. So let's say somebody dies and we go into that space in between, which religions like to call heaven or nirvana or whatever, it's what they're actually describing is what's taking place when the soul is transitioning from the body and it's remained in the bubble, meaning it hasn't broken that glass ceiling and gone outside of the earthly experience. This is how people like me can talk to the dead, because they're actually still attached to this plane, not in a way where they're imprisoned or chained here, but because they still have things they want to do here. And so what a soul will do is it will come in, it will play in many different forms of energy, light, incarnations. It will come in and it will play in here until it's done and gotten everything that it needs to. And when it makes that last transition, it breaks that glass ceiling. And it goes, because there are infinite dimensions, infinite bubbles in which to play. And so we can only conceptualize of this one because it's all we can remember right now. But what's really happening is So it's not like you're stuck here in some kind of endless cycle. You're going to be here until you don't want to be here anymore. And not through this brain, because 9 times out of 10, when I hear somebody say, well, I'm never coming back, you can be sure they're coming back, because they're not done, because they don't get it. And so, like, I sit in here and I look around at everything that's going on. I love it here. I love being here because I know I chose to be here. And I don't try to spend my time, thinking about, what it would be like when I'm out of here, or wanting to go sit in eternity at the right hand of God and play a harp somewhere. That's not how it works. We are our own creators, and every teacher who's ever walked the earth has always tried to give us that. Know ye not that ye are gods? In some way, shape, or form, they have been trying to tell us since the dawn of time.
Right. That's what I meant by being an infinite or an endless game. It's not just in this plane, but like you said, there's different levels, and it's just like, why would you want it to stop? It's like when you're watching a movie, you want it to end, but then when it ends, it's like, oh my God, and then you go and watch another movie, right?
Right.
You're the only person so far that I have heard that never had an experience with what we call evil or darkness.
I have, but my perception of what it means and what it's here for is completely different. I do not fear. I know with every fiber of my being that nothing can harm who I really am. And that applies to all of us. Therefore, it really makes it very hard to give a lot of power to what we call evil, right? So have I seen things? You better believe I have. I've had people in my healing room floating off of tables, speaking in tongues, spitting, I've seen it all. I mean, I really have. I have been present at many deaths and many births. I have taken people from the brink of suicide. I've seen so much stuff you couldn't believe. But my perception of, let's say I was in a session working with someone, and they had they start speaking like some other creature, or they're sweating and spitting and lifted off the table and all, and I literally will just stand there and let them do their thing, and I'll be like, are you done? But that's all I give it, and inevitably it stops, because it's like, it's like, look at me, and I'm like, really? Look, I'm like, I got lunch, I'm ready for my lunch, and I don't give it that kind of power over me. And so it's like anything, when people talk about the political state of the world now and all this kind of stuff, these are just spinning plates. And I can jump onto that plate and taste that food, and I can jump onto this plate and taste this food, but none of those plates control who I am, nor my perception or my interaction of the world around me.
I see. So what they're looking for is our attention, right? Because attention is the currency that we use, right? The energetic currency.
Correct. Exactly. Because, when we speak of intention, I've often said to people, especially when they're trying to break down the heaven and hell concept, well, do you know what? And I'm like, well, just out of curiosity, if we're talking about a thief, which thief gets to go and which thief doesn't get to go? Is, if the man who steals a loaf of bread to feed his family is a thief, and he's stealing, yet his intention is one of love and service to his family, or if a man steals another man's wife, or if a man steals $1 million, which one of them gets to go to heaven? Do you know? Because what people forget is that in that storyline, that man could be a thief. And in an interaction with another person, it's like, I've gone through a very difficult time with someone very close to me recently. And it's been hard, because what that individual did in my story, in our story as friends or people who know one another, it was pretty bad, Yet I also can appreciate, know, and accept that there are other people with which this individual interacts who think the world of this person, who absolutely adore this person. So which person is the real one? Both of them. Because that individual is showing up and being one thing in one story with one soul, and one thing in another with another soul. And so this idea that we judge it's so tired. It's so old. It's so outdated. This idea that we use our own criterion, like this is good and this is bad, and that, come on, because all of us are capable of being anything, and anyone who says that they're not is a liar. Because you might say, I'd never ever murder. Buddy, if I walked in my house and somebody was doing harm to one of my children, I'd kill them on the spot. Not even think twice about it. Do you know? And do I want to do that? Is that my intention to be that? No, but am I capable of doing that? Absolutely. So don't ever say never. And I find it interesting, I live in a country, where Catholicism is king here. And how interesting it is when we talk about suicide, because I also live in one of the highest suicide rates in the world, in Ireland, And I think it's so interesting because people will point the finger and go, oh, what a shame he brought on the family, or how selfish was that? And, he can't be buried in the churchyard because he took his own life. Yet if it happens on their doorstep, in their family, all of a sudden they're a lot more forgiving. And so if we would realize that these are the people that we're giving our emotions and our feelings to and allowing ourselves to be, criticized and judged by, come on. It's time to let ourselves off the hook and really start living. Not based on what other people's criteria of what we should be accomplishing here, but what our souls came here to accomplish.
Yeah, that takes me to when you pay attention to what other people are thinking of you, then you're giving them your energy. Going back to the two spirits or the two beings that you saw after the tunnel, I have baptized them as Eli's because you said their energy, light, and information.
Yes.
Can you talk to me a little bit about them, how they're related to this game we're playing?
Okay, well, first of all, you started, we're all fractals of the same whole. So ultimately, we're all coming from the same source, and we're all just pieces of light, because people will go, wait a minute, are you trying to tell me that there are beings out there whose entire lives are dedicated to my life? How awful for them. You mean they have to follow me around, watching me and whispering in my ear and loving me and being there, for watching from some other realm? That's really all they do? That's their existence? That's because they are part of you. No differently than I am looking at you and you are sitting there looking back at me, and you are a fractal of me, just dressed in different clothes. And I am a fractal of you, and the information that you and I are exchanging, if you're learning something new, you're teaching it to yourself. It's just that this projection of you that's out living life differently has been out gathering different information, the same as you've been gathering different information. And then we exchange this beautiful synergy, right? So those beings and those guides, they're just fractals of who we are. So it's like when I look at my children and I can see my own qualities. Do you know, in my two girls, I look and I'm like, oh my gosh, this one is so much like me in this way. And this one is so different. They're so different, yet they're both just like me, because they are carrying information and they are expressions of parts of myself that are growing, evolving, and becoming even better than me. I have replicated myself, and they are going and taking that baseline of information and expanding on it. Isn't that the coolest thing in the world?
Yeah.
And so beings, these Eli's, are there. They're basically our cheerleading squad. We set them up for ourselves so that we would never, ever, ever, ever be alone. We might think we're alone, but in reality, we are never, ever separate from that source. And they're the living proof of that. They are that which follows us from beginning to end, from alpha to omega. That's what they do. And they can take on any form. And some people might see them in a bird or a butterfly or in a new baby. And those energy and light forms can take on anything that we need. And we might need a sign so desperately, and all of a sudden something appears in front of us. And it doesn't have to be in human form. It can be in any form, because energy and light can take on any form.
So you mean that we're always in communication with them? It's sometimes that we don't pay attention or we don't want to.
We don't know that. You're right. And it's not that any of us are any more or less gifted than the other, but I'm in communication with them all the time. So I got really good at it. I can hear them because I practice it every single day. You know, my daughter sings every single day of her life. She's in performing arts school. She sings all the time. She's really, really good at it because she does it every single day. I practice healing and the manipulation of energy in a positive way in order to elicit change in another human being's life. So I'm really, really good at it. Not because I'm so blessed or special or I'm some chosen one. It's because I have worked hard and I am so disciplined. And I took the opportunities that were presented to me through that accident and I've expanded on them. I didn't have to. I chose to.
Okay. And that's part of the reason why you had the accident, right? Because then I'm going to let you say it because your grandfather showed up and told you what was to come or what you had to do.
Exactly. Well, when I got back into my body after that experience, and nobody made me come back, I wanted to come back because I realized I wasn't done. I realized that I'd been kind of fluting around for 21 years and not using these abilities that I had. And I went, oh, all right, I got work to do. I remember why I went there now. And I jumped back in. My neck was broken. My body was beaten up. And that was so important because it took me to the next step. And it was a chiropractor who put my body back together again after it was so broken. But what was so funny was my grandfather, who was a surgeon, a GP, he tells me that I'm going to go to chiropractic school. And I went, oh, no. I had just graduated from college. I'd been in school all of my life. I had no intention whatsoever. And he said, it is essential that you go back and that you learn the vitalistic philosophy and approach to the human body. It is essential to the work you're going to do that you know that the body is here to serve the spirit. Listen to that. The body is here to serve the spirit because we are all the time trying to have these enlightened spiritual experiences. We already are that. We came from perfection to experience imperfection, not the other way around. And so it was so important that I go and I learned that the body, if the body needs to become sick, it's because it's trying to get our attention. You know, it's the body is literally designed to serve the spirit in whatever way it wants to experience the world around it.
Mm-hmm. So then what did you develop with this new information that you acquired?
So now all of a sudden, you know, once I am on the path where I'm now going to become a doctor of chiropractic, I was an artist. And my degrees in college were art. So literally I had to go and get degrees in chemistry and physics. I can barely add 2 and 2. That's not the side of the brain I use, do you know? So now all of a sudden here I am. I'm going, and people just get so tickled when I'm like, I actually have a degree in chemistry and physics, and they're like, what? And it makes me laugh because I got through by the skin of my teeth, but I did it in order to get into the study of the human body. And it was just wonderful. And as I was in school, one of the things about chiropractors is because we use our hands, chiro, the practice of using the hand to elicit change in the body. And so because these gifts are unfolding and I can touch someone and I get a mental picture like a movie. I can see exactly where they left a piece of themselves in their past, their present, or their future that has caused dis-ease in the body. So what better place to do this where you are touching people all the time, legally? And here's me in school learning to touch people and feeling, and I'm getting to see all these things. And that's how I learned how to use these gifts.
All the information that you get once you get to touch people, where does it come from? Is it stored in the body? Is it like where is it?
It comes from all different places. Sometimes my guides help me. Sometimes my grandfather helps me. Sometimes I'm pulling it out of someone's energy field. Sometimes I'm reading their cellular memories. It's different at all times, do you know? And that's what's so phenomenal. So, and that's what keeps me so interested, was because every single person is different. And when people are like, well, tell me, before I sign up for a healing session, what does that entail? And I'm like, your guess is as good as mine, because yours is going to be unlike any other one I've ever done. Many, many, many years, and no two have ever been the same.
That can involve, I mean, with all your abilities, it could involve somebody like, I don't know, my guides maybe, or my angels, however you want to call them, telling you something or showing you something, or it could be something that I was carrying from another life.
Yes. So, or it could be somebody who comes to me because of mental illness. It could be somebody who's got cancer. Someone has HIV. Someone has just lost a child. Someone is feeling anxiety and anxiousness all the time. Someone is terrified. So it's every single person is different. Some people come in and they're feeling very good and they want to stay that way. And so the beauty of it over the years is, in the beginning, when I was, very new and young at this, I had to touch people. It's been many, many years. I enjoy being in the presence of other people, but I don't have to be in order to do it any longer, because frequency and light can travel in any way, shape, or form, and I can do it just as easily over the internet as I can sitting in the same room. My personal preference is I like being with people. I do it whatever way I have to, but I like people. That's why I came to Earth.
So do you think the plan was to build your self-confidence, your belief in you being able to do it? Once you have that belief, that self-confidence, now you can do it, at a distance?
Yeah. And what was very interesting is the way that it came. It didn't come like gradually. It came full on. I could take someone with brain cancer and heal them with a touch the second I got back. And thank goodness, I realized very, very early on that to touch someone and to heal them was doing nothing but satisfying my ego.
Right.
And I learned very early that this was not the meaning or the definition of healing. That healing was to show up and wipe the window clean so that a person could find their own way out. That you weren't to go in and take away difficulty and hardship or pain or dis-ease unless the person was in complete ownership of why they were there in the first place. If you did, then you're robbing them of an experience or an opportunity as a soul playing a human role. And so look what I did. Look who I healed. Look what I did. Who is that serving? Only myself, and it's not even serving me. And so I learned so early on, thank goodness, that this is not what healing means. And so my healing over the years has evolved tremendously in the way that I interact with people. And so it's far more efficient, and it's pretty incredible, and it's very fulfilling. And I'm very grateful every time that an interaction happens with somebody, because I know that when they are healing, that they are understanding. Healing doesn't mean it always works out to what feels best. Healing means that it works out to what's best serving the soul. And for some people, that's death. And for some people, that's hardship. And for some people, that's pain. And to go in and presume that you could take away that experience from the very one who gave it to them, which is them, that's crazy. So, I'm very, very grateful to be where I am and my understanding of what it is I actually do here.
So basically, they were healing themselves. You were just giving them...
You were moving information.
Excellent. That's where I wanted to go, because your new book, that's what it talks about, right?
Yeah, understanding is the new healing. And this one is very exciting for me, because this is the first book that's now been converted to Audible, Amazon Audible. And it's the first book in Audible history that has been infused with the brainwave states and the frequencies that I use in my healing.
Oh.
And so when I'm telling these stories, the person is not listening or just hearing an audible story. It is now an immersive experience where the frequency is bathing the entire field, and they're literally feeling the energy the intensity and the frequency of the story I'm telling, because I match the frequencies with the particular brainwave states, the emotional states, the physical states, and that person is now in that moment. And if they have something that is matching this vibe, they can heal it just like that.
For real? Oh my God, that's incredible.
Isn't it? I'm so excited. And I'm very, very grateful because, one of my dearest friends on the planet is a genius, a frequency and music genius named Greg Papania. And he does all the tech stuff. I do all the heady stuff with the spiritual guides, and he's right there too. But he takes all the tech stuff and he makes magic. And so I'm telling a story. I go, I need this frequency, this sound, this brainwave state, this, and bang. And so, yeah, I'm really excited because it's rare you get to be the first at anything in this world anymore. And so it's very exciting to be presenting this project. And I'd say you're going to see a lot more of it. And I'm delighted because what a way to hear a story, not just through your ears, but through your whole energy field, where it can actually elicit a change. You're not just reading a book for pleasure, but for change.
Wow, that's incredible. Congratulations. And I mean, you're going to use it for that. You can heal people, but aren't you afraid that it could be used in a wrong way?
No, not in the setting, not the way that it is in the book. Because, like, let's say I'm telling a story and I'm talking about extraterrestrials in the story.
Okay.
And let's say I'm talking about, and I'm using the frequency of 963 hertz, that's the highest frequency that we can hit while staying in the human body. And those who are working in other dimensions, who are interacting with our plane, they can lower to 963 and we can meet there. Okay, so having this understanding and knowing this, if somebody has lost someone close to them and they're like, I feel so disconnected, and the only reason they can't connect and hear is because their grief is so overwhelming. So they're now listening to the story and they go, wait a second, you mean we can talk to people in other dimensions while using this frequency? So they're listening to this story and all of a sudden their heart is opening and they're realizing that they have access to that other dimension in the way they feel that and connect with that lost loved one. And now they're gaining this new information. Really, they're remembering, right? So it's like the frequency of 396 hertz. This is fear, guilt, shame, grief, anger, self-loathing, right? We've all experienced some of that. And so if someone's listening to a story and this frequency is playing behind there, and we're talking about a woman who's given away her whole life to the grief of having to make a choice to abort a child or lose her own life because her husband says he'll murder her. She has 6 other children. She makes the choice to abort the child and carries the guilt her whole life. There are so many other people that might not have the exact same story, but might understand that feeling of deep grief. They connect in while they're listening to this frequency, and it changes the way that they judge themselves. And so how are you going to put that into the wrong hands, really? Do you know? It's like, boiling water could burn the face of somebody if you poured it on their face, and boiling water could also make a really nice cup of tea. So I don't worry about things being in the wrong hands. These things are accessible to all of us, and this is where soul plans and intention comes in. And I'm not trying to dictate how people use these things. I'm just making them available.
This is gonna put you in different vibrations, and then who's doing the work? Your subconscious?
Well, that's the best part about frequency. It bypasses all the BS. So your mind, regardless of what state your mind is or what your mind is thinking or how you're trying to dissect if this is working or not working or you believe it or don't believe it, frequency doesn't care about all that chatter. Frequency just gets to the business. So for instance, this is the easiest way to explain it to somebody. I have 2 guitars. One is sitting in this corner, one is sitting in this corner. I pluck the E string on this guitar, the E string on this guitar vibrates. Why? Because this guitar believes it should? No, it's physics. When you strike a chord with this particular frequency, there's a receptor on this side that's going to vibrate at the same thing. If I introduce the frequency of healthy DNA to damaged DNA, that DNA is going to try to reassemble itself. Now, it might be too damaged, and unable to do that, but it will try. And if someone's life path is such that they aren't meant to die from that damaged DNA, it will correct itself.
Oh, wow. I cannot wait to get that. Does that have something to do with binaural beats, or that's a different thing?
There are binaural beats in there. Yeah, binaural beats are just brainwave states. And what they're doing is they're syncing the right and left hemispheres. We always talk about, oh, I'm right-brained or I'm left-brained. You know, I'm definitely a right-brainer. I use, you know, far more of the creative aspect of my mind than I do. But you know what? When I was in school and dissecting bodies and doing the science, you know, I was actually pretty left-brained. I prefer the creative and dynamic aspect of my right brain. But the best brain is the one that's working together,
yes.
You know, so that we are in all aspects of that. And so what binaural beats will do is they will sync. That's what hemisync is about. It takes the two hemispheres of the brain and it causes them to start to gel together, and that they're working in tandem with one another.
Wow, it's such an interesting thing to be working on. Congratulations again, and hopefully we can have another conversation once your new book comes out.
Listen, thank you so much for having me, because without you, I couldn't do what I do. And I really appreciate you having me on and sharing this message.
Thank you everyone for being with us. We'll see you in the next episode. And remember, if you want to get any of Mary's books or how to get in touch with her, you can find all the links in the episode description.